Okay. Yeah. Do you, I mean, in fairness, do you feel this is kind of a chat GPT question, but I've seen quite a lot of things where, you know, people have put in the, you know, the bill, the renters rights bill into chat GPT and asked, you know, how can I get around it from a tenant's perspective? And there's some, you know, there's some pretty scary things that crop up. But, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my view was majority of tenants want to live in a nice house, they want to pay their rent, and they want to do the right things.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine, I mean, they might do it as a bit of a laugh, but I can't imagine that people are going to actively be doing that to cause problems.
To get out of the tenancy?
Yes.
No, nor do I, because there'll be a reason for it. There'll be a reason for it. And if they want to sort of, you know, change jobs, all that kind of stuff, that's kind of fine, but there's still a notice period. You know, I think we wouldn't recommend a landlord sign more than, we normally recommend a landlord sign 6 months at initial anyway, because you want to see how you get on with the tenant, blah, blah, blah. And then maybe extend, you know, 12 months at a time. So the 12-month thing, it's all by negotiation anyway. So dear tenant, you're coming to the end of your tenancy agreement. The landlord would like for you to sign for another 12 months. No, thanks, because I don't know where I'll be in 12 months. So there's still a negotiation at that point. But no, you can't sign for 12 months. It'll be sort of rolling periodic. But I think, like you say, if you offer a valuable product, you know, I think there's no reason you should be scared of re-advertising your property, because it should be rentable. Ultimately, it should provide value.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of these things also, it's running your business correctly. So, for instance, you know, you should be putting aside every month, you know, a proportion of that to go to renovations and refurbs. Because obviously over time, so it's a bit like, you know, even in a kind of an everyday business, not just property, if you've bought something to then sell something, you want to be putting aside money to cover the purchase of it. And it's exactly the same, isn't it, with property? If you're constantly getting money in and that's working really well for a number of years, you know that at a certain point you're going to have to invest a bit more money into that. So you should put money aside and all of those kind of things. So it is going back to running a correct business to me, and having
and it feels like, I mean, that's quite a hard thing to do, isn't it? I think, because there's no run into, you know, one day you don't own something, then you do, and all of a sudden you expect to do all these things. You have assets, liabilities, you know, you've got income expenses, you've got a fully functioning business, you know, profit and loss balance sheet, all that good stuff on day one. And then putting money aside for contingency, absolutely, that is the right thing to do. We've just sort of started a service in our own agency that some landlords taken advantage of, where we hold some of the rent in our client account on an accrued basis to make sure that they can afford that the boiler when it goes, or the carpets when they need changing and things like that. It's a discipline that, you know, is the right discipline. I think also hard to do sometimes.
Yeah, that's a really good idea, actually. I mean, because everyone thinks, don't they, that they're going to do it themselves, but inherently, and certainly that's what I learned with doing this rent to buy, is that you've got so many people out there who genuinely have, you know, saved up money, and then suddenly maybe their car blew up. Suddenly that, you know, and then suddenly that a big chunk of it's gone. And then, you know, another year goes on and actually the prices of houses have gone up. So they need an even bigger deposit to get there. So there's always kind of, you know, people have good intentions. So I really like that idea. Was that your idea, or was that kind of an industry thing that's coming in?
We had a chat with one of our sort of our landladies about it, and it was kind of a service that she said, that would work really well. So we started doing it. Yeah.
I like it. Very, very good. So how about rent increases then? So that is genuinely, you know, it can be quite a scary thing. And I think also as a landlord, I know a lot of people that I kind of mentor, they talk about, oh, well, you know, I don't really want to increase the rent, you know, I really like them, the family. And I kind of always remind them that for me, and you know, I don't know where you come from, Chris, but I think it's really important to ensure that you keep the rent as close to market rent as possible, because if something did happen, and let's say, you know, something happened and you needed to sell your property, for that person to then suddenly have to find a huge, you know, many more £100 to move into a new property is actually really hard. So there is this kind of big thing about sort of rent. So let's cover that one. So do you think it's important to keep the rents at a, you know, an amenable level in line with market rents?
I really do. Lots and lots of reasons, really. So like you said, you have got an obligation as a landlord to maintain your house. So how are you going to do that if your rent's low and you can't afford it? So it protects your ability to maintain your house and do the right thing. So that's a angle on it. We've also had situations where we've taken on houses where the rent has been way below market value. We suggested an increase because this is the market, and anyway, the landlord goes for it, puts the rent up, tenant can't afford it, leaves. So not a great position for tenant to be in, and not a great position for landlord to be in because they get a void. So that's another sort of angle on it. And then you touched on the sort of saleability of your house. So we have come across houses and landlords where the rent for their property is low, they want to sell it. It's not a good investment purchase for anyone because the rent is below the market rate. So if an investor's looking at that property, the first thing they're going to do is have to increase the rent for the sitting tenant and risk a void. It's just not an attractive place to be. So it decreases the value of your investment property to the resale market. And if it's not being maintained because you're not made to do it, a double-edged sword. So I think it's for lots of reasons, put the rent up close to market value. And I think that's where agents kind of come in quite handy because they've got processes that say the rent was increased 12 months ago, the market is now this, I suggest this. And that's just a process that they will just have. You can choose to say yes to that or no to that, or come a bit under their recommendation. But I think self-managing landlords don't do that with quite the rigor that some agents do. Because we're expected to do that. That's part of our service. And that's, you know, really, that alone is a reason to use an agent because you know that there'll be a rent review process.
Yeah. So what about if you buy a property, for instance, let's say you buy an HMO and there's some tenants in there and their rents are really low. How would you go about, you know, dealing with that kind of situation?
I think it depends on how you want to deal with it, I suppose. So you two options. So the communications and the relationship is always key. So you know, you're not dealing with an asset, you're dealing with a person. So sort of bear that in mind. If you're using an agent, then your agent should be having that conversation, you know, understanding the tenants, where they're at with their finances and that kind of stuff. But you can increase the rent. The landlord is entitled to do that using the correct notice. And the tenant can either say yes or no to that. And if they say no to that, then they might want to leave and all this good stuff. So it does depend a little bit on where you want to take your property. Where do you want it in the market? Because you can sit top, middle, or bottom of any market, and people will have their own views on that. But if they want to make it, you know, boutiquey and top end, you kind of need to do quite a lot of stuff to your property to demand that rent. It's just having in mind, and what I'm talking about these days is a value, not the rental price. That's only one side. What are they buying for that? And it's the value that you're trying to offer. So if you can offer a high price but high value, that's kind of fine. But if you want to be sort of middle or bottom, that's okay too. So I think really about where do you want to sit? I mean, my parents invest in property and they want to sit, you know, top probably 80% kind of thing. Not the, you know, top right at top of the market, but they want to be sort of just above the top or just the 2 or 3 tiers below that. Not the middle. They want to be above the middle. And I think that's quite a nice place to be. But I think it depends on where you want to take your property, really. If it's the rent's not high enough, then I think it should go up ultimately.
Yeah, definitely. And it is so key, but I think there is, you know, an awful lot of fear around, as you've mentioned, this not knowing. You don't know what you don't know. And that's where, you know, getting a really good letting agent on board to help you do that, I think is absolutely key. So how about, you know, this kind of the thoughts around having, you know, the decent home standards, and really having kind of stricter regulations around that? Because again, you know, you could have somebody move in and, you know, then they've been there for, let's say, 5 years, and, you know, the property that they moved into was, you know, really spick and span and beautiful. And then obviously over time, things can happen. Where are your thoughts on this element?
Yeah, so listen to a few webinars and stuff about this one, but from what I understand, the landlord's obligations haven't really changed. It's the mechanism by which they're enforced has changed. So landlords have always had the obligation to keep homes safe, habitable, and you know, structurally well repaired, all that kind of stuff. Like, we've always had that. The decent home standards, I think, was a standard that's used to assess public sector housing that's now been applied to the private sector. So it's just the set of standards that existed that just been applied to us. Fundamentally, it's not changed. You still need to provide a good accommodation. I think that's partly, and if a landlord starts to say, well, do I really need to do that, or should I read? I think that question rings alarm bells, because what about the you're providing, and that, you know, remember that value equation we kind of talked about, and you know, so unfortunately there's never quite clear cut. Do I absolutely need, will those carpets go 1 more year? You know, so you know, that is a judgment call, isn't it? Do you want them to go 1 more year, or do you want to pay £300 to change that carpet? You know, it's that's probably the where I kind of see the conversations, the value of the conversation. Of course, you don't have to change your carpet, but you probably should, because you kind of want to. Because if you wouldn't live there, then you kind of should.
Yeah, definitely. And but equally, it is a difficult one, isn't it? As you said, you have different types of landlords. You have perhaps a landlord that's literally got 1 or 2 properties, and that's paying for their mortgage, compared to the portfolio landlords. And again, it goes back to you know, attempting to run it in a proper way and being led and directed by somebody, you know, like you, who can offer, which I thought was great, a contingency to hold, you know, funds in there. So, I mean, again, inherently it goes back to the point of knowing that as long as you're offering a great product, you're going to be absolutely fine.
Yeah.
But then you've got I suppose the other one, which, you know, something like mold is a really big one, isn't it? Because
it is. Yeah,
they're rating the property. You know, you may be putting wet washing everywhere and all of those kind of things. So, what kind of issue do you spend a lot of time educating the tenant? Where are you at with that?
Yeah, it's a great one. It's so with a lot of student properties. So nature of a HMO, some of the houses, you know, weren't designed to be HMOs, but then I got 6 people in them. So all having, you know, a shower every day and cooking 6 lots of whatever. So there's way more moisture in the houses that are ever intended to be. So there's more condensation, and there's more, you know, perhaps more mold because of that. In my mind, there's two things to mold. Is it landlord or tenant responsibility? And if it comes outside in, it's always landlord, because it's, you know, that's the structure of the house. If it's inside out, that tends to be ventilation and heating. So there is a lot of, you know, education that comes along with it. In my mind, that if it's condensation related, because moisture in the air goes to a cold wall, it will condense and it will stay wet. And if it's ventilated and heated, it will also dry. That will be fine. If it's not ventilated and heated, or it's behind a sofa or behind something against the wall, there's no airflow, there's a chance that might appear in mold. For me, that's a kind of a care that something the tenant can control. Within 2 sprays, you can kill mold, and it's all sorted. And then there's you know, don't put things against cold walls, ventilate every day, and perhaps, you know, don't use the don't dry clothes inside, so keep the moisture down. So there's a whole load of education around that, I think.
Wow, so it is a big thing, isn't it? Because you can imagine, I remember when I was a student, student lets are not like they were in my day. I mean, they were absolutely horrific. I can't believe my son's currently away at college and his room is like, wow. I mean, in fact, it's nicer than his own room.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, it is a challenging thing, isn't it? Because people live their lives in different ways and they don't always want to do the things that might help the property, and then you get the results of that. But it's still a challenge, isn't it, for them to understand this is your issue, this is your fault, and then if they don't do something, it really can then affect the house and the upkeep of it.
It can, and there's always an underlying relationship thing that's going on here, because even though a tenancy agreement or a law or whatever says one thing, that doesn't preclude you still have a relationship with the person you're talking to, that you really want to keep that relationship as good as it possibly can be, at the same time as being clear about responsibilities. I think that's something we struggle with. I think is the idea of a tenancy agreement is living in a property, and you have the responsibility to care for that property. A hotel is not that. So I reckon there's a slight blur, and student accommodation, because it's by nature, it's a 1-year contract. It's my home for a very short time. It's not my 5-year home sort of thing. So my propensity to want to care for that property is a little bit less, but the obligations are still the same, even though it's a year, maybe 10, 11 months. So it's a bit of a, it's a different agreement, isn't it? A tenancy agreement versus a hotel or a short stay. There is obligations of the tenant as well.
Yeah. It sounds like you have a lot of juggling. I'm just trying to imagine chatting to a load of having got two students myself in the house of that age, knowing what they're like. It looks interesting. So I'm just aware of time now. We're coming to the end, but so are you seeing, or do you foresee a kind of shift in the type of landlords that are entering the market? So obviously we talked about having that one or two properties, or are you really seeing sort of more larger scale investors wanting to come in?
I think it's hard to comment on the whole market, but most of our properties are owned by investment landlords. Is the truth. We had the portfolio that we acquired about a year ago was more on the 1 and 2 properties, and it's very different outlooks. It's a different conversation to have with that landlord than an investment landlord. In terms of where the markets go, I don't know. It feels like it's probably going. The number of properties per landlord is probably going to increase over time. I would suggest, but people still do want to buy properties and invest in them. I think for the right reasons, because it's a good place to put your money, and bricks and mortar is something the UK like investing in, and indeed international like investing in UK property as well. But I think the fundamentals are still very strong in property, because there's a shortage of it. There's an inflationary pressure on property, and those two things will make for good investments, really.
Yeah, definitely. And I think actually it's not necessarily a reflection on the market always. There's obviously a huge push now of education around property investing. So therefore, whereas the olden days, you maybe made a bit of money and you'd be thinking, oh, what am I going to do with that money? Oh, we'll pop it into a property. Now there's so much more professionalism. There's so much more knowledge. You might suddenly see somebody up the road who seems to suddenly be growing a portfolio. How did you do that? Oh, I went to a networking meeting, and then I actually decided to do a course.
Yeah.
So I think for me, it's not necessarily a reflection on the the Renters' Right bill. I actually think there's just so many more things reflecting that, and certainly for me, when you look at the number of people who would have had no thought in the past of coming in and investing in property, they're suddenly seeing ways that you can actually come into property through. I know you've mentioned that you do sourcing now within your business and all of that, and that these are really interesting ways of coming into this property environment without having this huge 25% deposit or whatever.
So much of that, isn't there? I think it's coming onto these networking meetings does open your eyes, because to invest in property, you've got a lot of money, right? But then it doesn't have to be your money, etc., etc. So using other people's is quite a weird concept, but that is absolutely the way the great investors do it. So having those thoughts in your mind about how can I, create wealth, create a good product, and all this kind of stuff. It's a much wider topic than just owning a building, which is great. I love having those types of conversations.
Yeah, definitely. So it sounds, if we were to conclude on this, that obviously you have a big letting agent. You certainly do not feel it, and you've talked about the fact that you're expanding and growing, that there is still massive opportunities for landlords and for buying property in our little island in the UK.
Yeah, and absolutely. So, yeah, the fundamentals are great. They're sound. You've got to be aware of what the market you're going into, and are you up for that? Because responsibilities come with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so thank you so much, Chris. This has been really interesting. So obviously, I know you do a number of things. So would you mind just sort of giving us a bit of information on where people can perhaps come and find you, what you offer within your business, and if people are interested, what can they come to do with you?
Yeah, thank you very much. So our website is jonesandco.co.uk. We're a letting agency primarily. We started in Norfolk, Norwich, and we now obviously offer the ability to sell houses for investors or homeowners, and obviously a sourcing product. We've got acquisition manager Ollie who does the sourcing, and a sales manager Philippa who sells houses. So as well as letting them, we can sort of buy them and sell them for you as well. So the conversation I really like having is the why would I bother buying investing in property, and it's that type of conversation I quite like having, because not doing it is often more risky than doing it.
Yeah, definitely, because we certainly don't. It's frightening when you actually hear people have got huge amounts of money sat in the bank. Yeah. And as we know, actually, especially in big inflationary times, you're in a great position if you've got a mortgage on your property, because it's actually it's shrinking that mortgage, so to speak.
Yeah,
a really good way. Amazing. Well, Chris, thank you so much. I've learned lots today, and I'm looking forward to my 9 more tenants that are going to be arriving.
I'm sure it'll be great. When is that happening?
So we should exchange and complete around the 11th, so not that far away
now. Okay, brilliant.
Very, very, very imminent. So and having been used to guests where they don't have rights in the same way, it is it's a good thing. But I wanted to move into that, as with the strategies, it's great to have. I think service accommodation is a bit more of a high risk. An HMO is
a bit more predictable, I'd say.
A bit more predictable, yeah. Not necessarily, it's got its risks, absolutely. Yeah. So that's what we wanted to move across with. So brilliant. Excellent. So Chris, if I may ask, if that's okay, to have a final word from you before we say goodbye.
Oh, final word. What's my final word? Keep your mind open about the idea of investing in property. I think the fundamentals are great. I believe having a good agent or people and support network around you is really important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely concur with that. Brilliant, guys. So I will be back again next Monday. So do come and join us then. And again, Chris, thank you so much for taking your time to be with us today and sharing incredible information. We really appreciate that. And we will be putting the link to Chris's website in the comments underneath, so that you can come and find him as well. Brilliant.
Amazing.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Take care.
Take care.